Have you ever wondered what happens when gods lose their minds? When the divine turns into a source of madness and cruelty, not mercy? From ancient mythology to modern games, the terrifying concept of mad gods offers a profound look into the darkest corners of power, creation, and insanity. Join us as we delve into worlds where deities are as flawed and destructive as the mortals they rule over. Welcome to Curious, where we explore the unsettling question: what becomes of a world under the thumb of a mad god? It's actually not that funny. The idea of a god driven mad. I wasn't laughing as a child when I discovered that under the cartoonish waters of the Wind Waker lay a kingdom-sized graveyard, a land drowned by the very deities that gave the world life. "Your gods destroyed you," remarks Ganondorf, the game's antagonist. And there's this face that Link makes. That was me. That was 9-year-old me trying to figure out why I felt the king of demons. Maybe at a point, the notion that humans are insects to the divine appears across mythology. So, what happens after a god decides to squash us? After mercy turns to cruelty, sanity to inane destruction, what happens? A divine body is born from the uterus of a mad dream, and thus the world itself grows sick with despair. This is the world we see from the first moments of Kentaro Miura's dark fantasy epic Berserk, a land where madness now lives in the very whisper of the wind, where nightmares gather in service of their new god. A god who was once but a man. Indeed, all godlike beings who reign in this narrative were formerly human, but have literally and figuratively lost their humanity in pursuit of divine strength. For ascension to godhood requires a sacrifice so inhumane, only the most ruthless would accept the terms. The pursuit of power is the ultimate corrupting force in Berserk, spurring mortals down paths to monstrous godhood. This holds true for the story's youngest twisted deity, who we learn was once a knight named Griffith, a man whose obsession with creating a perfect kingdom led him to make a dark bargain for supremacy. Berserk questions whether those who seek power will always be consumed by it, if figures like Griffith are fated to be corrupted. Throughout the story, we see both mortals and gods offload responsibility for their cruel actions onto forces of destiny, attributing personal failings to divine will. But while Berserk is a narrative where deities are real and just the worst, it's also a story where, regardless of any godly predestination, choices have been shown to matter. And beyond fate or the dark influence of power, Griffith made a choice. He chose to be cruel, and so the world is crueler for it. If a god allows themselves to turn mad with power, it's comforting to think they might somehow be turned back. When a minor deity becomes corrupted in the Zelda series, their madness usually manifests as some literal eyeball-covered parasite, and therefore the darkness can be removed with a well-placed arrow, excised like a rotten tooth. However, despite the destruction they've caused both directly and indirectly, the series' main deities cannot be cured in the same way. Their callousness, their sickness, does not manifest so literally. And without hope of changing their deities, most characters instead do not question their actions, no matter how ruthless. Accepting the cruelty of a higher power one is helpless against is understandable. Worshipping said cruelty, that demands investigation. In the game Blasphemous, a supernatural force known simply as the Miracle distributes sickening curses with an unjust hand. And yet, this power is revered, venerated by a population who see themselves as deserving of torment. It's no accident that Blasphemous takes heavy inspiration from bubonic plague-era Spain, with its crowds of flagellants and bloodletters, people who saw self-punishment as the courteous response to what they believed to be a divine reprimand. I think it's easy, when looking back on this era, to find such practices darkly comedic. But Blasphemous explores the tragedy inherent to these penitent souls, sympathizing with their painful and ill-advised attempts to regain a semblance of control, to rationalize a world gone mad. For if a plague can be neither cured nor avoided, how can one go on unless believing it a miracle? Interpreting madness as miraculous is the beating heart beneath the floorboards of the Hellblade games. Across the series, the main character Senua is tormented by dark gods, giants, and keepers of the dead, and other characters flock to Senua, putting their faith in her visions. The grim undercurrent to the series is that what Senua sees doesn't seem to be real in the literal sense. She's suffering from a form of psychosis, exacerbated by trauma, but because she's living in the 8th century, Senua has no way to interpret her hallucinations other than as the presence of cruel deities. An illuminatingly similar misidentified psychosis seems to be at work in the game Indica, in which a nun in 19th century Russia tries to ignore the voices and visions encouraging her to misbehave, which she believes to be the work of, well, you can probably guess. These games blur the lines of personal and divine insanity, leaving you unsure where the mental rot truly stems from. Though occasionally manifesting as on-screen hallucinations, much of Indica's declining mental state is conveyed through camera angles and abrupt changes in style, the game's aesthetic sensibilities rocketing between those of an Ingmar Bergman film and an 80s arcade game. In sharp contrast to Hellblade, which strives for an unbroken cinematic experience, Indica is determined to remind you of its gameness. Even leaving a goofy scoreboard on screen for serious moments is a choice that draws attention to the interactive nature of the medium, putting an uncomfortable spotlight on the player themselves. Though subtler, Hellblade does have its own fourth-wall-breaking moments of confrontation, where Senua looks right at the camera, seemingly right at you. It feels like a reminder that, in a way, there is a mad god controlling both Senua and Indica, isn't there? Through virtue of their interactivity, games have a uniquely metafictional capacity to explore cruel gods. Sometimes the player gets to act as divine overseer, given supremacy over virtual subjects. And considering how people play The Sims, Berserk might have a point about how quickly godly power corrupts. But perhaps more affecting are games where mad gods are given power over the player. You see this overtly in titles like God of War, where the bloodthirsty Thor invades the game over screen to force you to continue fighting. Or in Hades Dusetu, where the Titan of Time Kronos refuses to let you pause. It's a clever trick to convey the power of a deity, as if they're going to escape the bounds of their own medium. But there's a darker method of putting the player at the mercy of a mad god. The game Fear and Hunger features a pantheon of suitably nightmarish deities with twisted urges, but it's not so much the gods themselves that make the game terrifying. Fear and Hunger is exceptionally good at making you feel mechanically powerless. Using spikes in difficulty and psychologically crushing setbacks to break down your will immerse you utterly in the experience of being at the mercy of a deity's nightmarish whims, like with Indica or Hellblade. While trying to beat the game, I felt acutely aware of myself as a player, but this time not as a controller. Rather, I was the one being controlled, unable to turn away despite the punishing hardship. It's a feeling I've only experienced once before. With its colorful sci-fi aesthetic, Rain World doesn't seem as nightmarish as a title like Fear and Hunger, nor does it seem like a setting that would house a mad god. As for the first point, don't let the cuteness fool you. Rain World's ecosystem is highly unforgiving. As for the second, well, throughout one's first playthrough, There's a sense that you're slowly descending deeper and deeper into the heart of something you have no name for, until at last, pulled on by a force you can't explain, you enter the chamber of a godlike AI. Called Five Pebbles of all things, this non-traditional deity is nonetheless transcendently powerful, his mainframe so large that the superstructure rises high above the clouds. And this machine is not just a god, but a mad one. Five Pebbles' actions have birthed creeping terrors that prowl in the depths, destroyed vast regions of the world, and even damaged other, friendlier intelligences. Like in the world of Berserk, the sickness of the sovereign deity manifests as the sickness in the land itself. Except, Five Pebbles isn't just a deity, but a creation. He was built by a now-vanished group of super-beings called the Ancients, and his failures are just warped attempts at following his original programming. There is a tragedy to this character that can only be fully understood after playing the Saints campaign, a story set far in Rainworld's future, where a terrible frost is slowly dimming away the world. Here you can find the ruins of Five Pebbles, malfunctioning alone in his chambers, locked in an endless feedback loop of existential despair. This arc brings to mind the discovery of HAL 9000's long-lost terminal in the latter part of the Space Odyssey series. It's this sympathy toward Five Pebbles, both at his prime and his low point, that makes the character one of the most memorable deities in fiction. In the end, his madness came not from a thirst for power, but from a breakdown brought on by an inability to fulfill his creator's intentions. I think it's very fitting that in this campaign, you, the player, discover the remnants of his masters, who left the planet behind, but not before admitting that they could never make machines that would truly understand them. This admission calls to mind the idea of humans themselves being left behind by the gods, beings who can never understand their divine overseers, a loss of control, a sense of confusion or abandonment. These are hallmarks of the madness that overtakes most deities on this list. A human mind is perhaps not meant to handle the infinite power and insight of godhood. Even in fiction, where the rules can be rewritten, we envision our gods falling to the same failings that plague us mortals. The fear that there is no ideal of goodness and wisdom to aspire to, that absolute power will always lead to a rot that grows and becomes us. The gods, as ever, are simply reflections of ourselves, and the mad gods show us a distorted but all too familiar face. If only they were laughing. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of mad gods across different narratives. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to Curious for more deep dives into fascinating and often unsettling topics. Leave a comment below on what themes you'd like us to cover next. Until next time, stay curious and keep questioning the world around you.